Hey guys, how you doing? In the last couple of decades, prequels have been yet another manifestation of studio greed and trying to extend an IP to its limits. And it makes sense, right? Google defines a prequel as a movie or story containing events that precede those of an existing work. So think about it. If a studio wraps up a huge money-making franchise and has no logical place to take the story, why not take it back now, y'all? Throw in some familiar faces, describe the origins of a random object the main character has, bada bing bada boom, you have made $1 billion. That's not to say that all prequels are born out of corporate greed. Some of them genuinely do try to expand the universe that they're set in. Star Wars tried, I guess. Some of those prequel X-Men were pretty good. Like, 2 of them. The Hobbits were fine. And Leprechaun in the Hood? Point is, prequels don't exactly have a stellar reputation. And should they? Most of the time, it's so obviously a cash grab, a desperate last chance to milk us customers out of $15 more or another 45 minutes of watching. And even when it's not a cash grab, often the filmmakers fail to bring the same charm or quality as the original. Star Wars.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here everything is soft and smooth.
So on paper, the idea of a Breaking Bad spinoff following the comedic relief side character Saul Goodman would not fill me with optimism. But it's Breaking Bad, so of course it's good. And dare I say it, it's better than Breaking Bad? Kinda, maybe? Okay, it's on par with Breaking Bad, easily. The way it so carefully and quietly intertwines an entirely different show and energy with the previous powerhouse of mainstream television is undoubtedly genius. Did that make sense? Was that a normal sentence? And it's been accommodated for its greatness too. With countless Emmy noms, Critics' Choice Awards, and more, an entire Wikipedia page worth, actually, it's fair to say that Better Call Saul is one of the most successful prequels of all time. But why? What separates Better Call Saul from the rest? How do you make a prequel? I think to create a prequel as exquisite as Better Call Saul, you have to rely on the new instead of the old. Let me explain. I get the temptation as a studio to lean on the already successful franchise that spawned it. It's easy. It's surefire nostalgia. But when relying on the new, you get something so much more fulfilling. Better Call Saul works because of the new. The new visuals, the new characters, and the new protagonist. I feel like many pretentious film bros on Twitter like myself hold atmosphere and cinematography over almost anything in the film world, often to an inadvisable point. Everyone bitching and whining about how poorly Marvel movies are shot? That's us. And while Breaking Bad is pretty universally loved, I'm often surprised to see it not get shit on by Cinema Fan 300 for not looking so great at times. Not to say that it doesn't have good shots. It does. But man, sometimes it's just ugly to look at. The piss filters, the sometimes ugly environments. Still one of the greatest shows of all time, but And so I wouldn't blame Better Call Saul if it had the same aesthetic. If I took 2 frames from both shows and put them next to each other without any prior knowledge, I probably couldn't even tell they're from the same universe. That's how drastic the aesthetic change is. And that's usually not the goal for companies trying to create an intertwined universe, right? But no, the second Better Call starts, you realize this isn't a retread. This is a different show. I think the reason Breaking Bad looks the way it does is to depict the grossness of the characters and the world they live in. Same with Better Call Saul. It's a cinematic, often melodramatic event that is beautifully supplemented by its truly inspired cinematography. And dude, some of these shots are just crazy. Like some serious inventiveness went into each and every frame. The way this show is shot, combined with its refined and more sophisticated atmosphere, just brings it to an entirely different level. So what else is new? Improved visuals isn't that much of a difference, at least not to warrant the title of best prequel of all time. I think that's where these new, rich characters come in. So often in prequels, supporting characters are throwaways, just people to fill in the space before we see a familiar face again. But Better Call Saul has such a heart-wrenching, brilliant supporting cast, one that surpasses almost every other single prequel in its path. But that's not to say that Better Call Saul is devoid of Breaking Bad characters. We still have Gus, Mike Finger Ehrmantraut, Hank, Lydia, and of course, Saul. But it's brilliant to mix these familiar faces with brand new ones. like Howard, Kim, Nacho, Lalo, Chuck. And like I said, these aren't just throwaways. They're completely thought through, fleshed out people. People you can feel and relate to and sympathize with. Suddenly, the question isn't just what's going to happen to these characters for them not to be in Breaking Bad, but how will their arcs be resolved in a way that treats the character right. But the first question is plenty relevant too. Here's the thing, some prequels, especially Star Wars, lack all tension whatsoever. Because we know what's going to happen. Anakin becomes Darth Vader, Bilbo has the ring, the minions have Gru, and there's no room in the canon to really diverge from that. It just feels like one long slog to the finish line, making sure everyone is in their perfect places for their original entry. And yeah, because people like Kim and Lalo and Nacho aren't hanging around during Breaking Bad, the assumption is that they're going to die or leave somehow, but it's not set in stone. See, that's why it's so important as a prequel to introduce new and important characters. And in doing so, catching up to the original is way less of a burden. When you don't know the fate of the characters, the audience is left in a suspended feeling of, suspense. The most impressive thing a prequel can do is leave you wondering what's going to happen, instead of wondering how it's going to feed into the original. And listen, so far all my steps seem to be just avoiding the original content as much as possible. That is not my intention at all. But I do think prequels work better when the transition to the present is gradual and subtle, rather than a simple rehash of old characters, old settings, old stories. Finally, the third step on how to make a prequel is to have a new protagonist. And obviously, I'm using the term new lightly. Of course Bilbo isn't new, of course Saul isn't new. But a good prequel totally reinvents its protagonist, separating them from the previous iteration. Jimmy McGill is almost a completely different person than Saul Goodman. He's slimy, sure, and morally questionable at times, but couldn't be more different than the child poisoning, drug money hoarding douchebag that Saul is. And much like Anakin to Vader, this series sees how he slowly dips his feet into corruption. The character will never be truly new, but prequels allow them to be seen through an entirely different light. In this case, a light of innocence. The ideal thing a prequel can do is make you look at the original through a different perspective. Better Call Saul's depiction of Jimmy does that beautifully. I don't think there's much more for me to say here. Better Call Saul is fine television. Extremely fine television. I couldn't be more excited for the rest of the show. And if Bob Odenkirk and Rhea Seehorn don't get Emmys this season, I will personally go down to Frank Sherman's office and I will